Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents How I Did It, Lessons from the Front Lines of Business, by Harvard Business Review, narrated by Mark Cabus and Susan Larkin.
Introduction. For more than a century, business schools have been developing ways to teach students the basic tools of business: how to create and understand accounting documents, analyze cash flows, and appraise the strengths and weaknesses of strategic choices. These tools, and others like them, can be vital to managers who are starting their careers, but their value typically diminishes as a person's responsibilities increase. The reason is simple. The higher an executive advances, the more likely the job will involve making complex decisions that rely less on tools and more on wisdom. That's especially true for chief executives. According to one rule of thumb, chief executives are never asked to make easy calls. If the decision was easy, it never would have reached the CEO's desk in the first place. It's the hard choices that come one after another, all day and every day. It's not possible to teach the wisdom required to make these decisions, since wisdom is a function of experience, but it is possible to improve decision-making over time by repeatedly observing and simulating decisions made by others. This is why quarterbacks sit in darkened rooms, watching films of opposing teams' defenses. It's why Navy SEALs study after-action reports to understand what went right and wrong on past operations. It's also why, nearly a century ago, B schools, led by Harvard Business School, began using case studies to try to expose students to real-life business problems in hope that simulating and debating the choices made by managers would help aspiring leaders put theory into practice. The essays in this book are a singular contribution to this tradition. Like case studies, they take readers inside the C-suite, but they go further, giving inside detail and perspective about the decisions made by the chief executives involved, told in their own words. Beyond the bona fides of their authors, current and past leaders of companies including Google, Xerox, General Electric, DuPont, Burberry, and many others, the most striking element of these narratives is their candor. The public has a tendency to view top executives as polished, decisive, and infallible, and in fact, some executives work hard to burnish this image. However, the CEOs in many of these essays admit to being uncertain or nervous. They get angry. They screw up. "We spent years trying and failing," writes the CEO of IMAX, describing his 20-year struggle to find a workable strategy. "We were wrong," writes the CEO of McLaren, describing a stroller recall as one of the most difficult times in my business life. "I remember thinking, we're screwed," writes Google's Eric Schmidt, describing his misgivings the morning the company went public. Often, when CEOs agree to share a story with a business magazine, they're attempting to speak to a particular constituency: their shareholders or potential investors, their customers, or even their employees. But when CEOs write for Harvard Business Review, they're typically concerned less with image or stock price and more with the duty they feel to pass along lessons to a future generation of managers, to provide a sort of virtual mentorship, and in that way to help improve the practice of management. We hope their stories help prepare you for the hard decisions that lie ahead in your career. The Editors. Picking the right people. Sometimes the best management advice is also the most succinct. On that measure, it's hard to beat one of the core teachings of Jim Collins: first who, then what. No matter what grand strategy a company pursues, Collins argues in Good to Great, its odds of success are long unless its managers ensure they have the right people on the bus. That's why many of the best executives spend the bulk of their time selecting, developing, and promoting the most talented people they can find, and encouraging the wrong people to opt to spend more time with their families. What's surprising about this work is how much disagreement there is over the right way to pick and groom people, whether entry-level workers or the next CEO. In several of the essays that follow, top executives explain why they disregard the procedures that HR types promote as best practice. One CEO explains why resumes and job interviews aren't a good indicator of potential, and why energetically checking references is the single most valuable way managers can identify real talent. Another boss explains why the traditional horse race for the corner office is a terrible way to pick a leader, and outlines how she spent a decade preparing her single, hand-picked successor for the job. What's clear in all of these pieces is that people decisions loom large among the problems that keep CEOs awake at night, which means getting more of the right people on board can help everyone rest easier. Gilt Groupe's CEO on Building a Team of A Players by Kevin Ryan. Kevin Ryan is the founder and CEO of Gilt Groupe. The idea. Companies always say employees are their most valuable asset. Kevin Ryan thinks that few of them act accordingly. He believes a CEO's most important job is managing talent. When I think about starting a business, my view is that the idea itself is worth between zero and very little. Most new companies already have competitors when they launch, and if they don't, they soon will. DoubleClick, where I was CEO from 1996 to 2005, had dozens of competitors within a year of its founding. Gilt Groupe wasn't the first flash sales company, and Google was by no means the first search engine to come along. Why have these businesses succeeded? It's not the idea, it's the people. Execution is what matters, and execution relies on human talent. Every company thinks it's doing a good job of managing its people. They all say, people are our most important asset. But most companies don't really act that way. Here's a simple test. Ask the CEO if he or she spends more time on recruiting and managing people than on any other activity. For me, the answer has always been yes. That's a radical statement, so let me qualify it a bit. I don't think this test applies at a small company, say 20 people, where the CEO may be doing a lot of the sales or directly overseeing operations. But at businesses that employ more than 50 people, the best use of a CEO's time is to bring in unbelievable people, manage them well, and make sure the company builds and maintains an A-caliber team. Here's another test of a company's devotion to its talent. Is your head of HR one of the most important people in the company? I spend as much time with our head of HR as I do with our chief financial officer, and I'd never consider having the head of HR report to anybody but the CEO. That role is truly strategic, and the person in it needs a seat at the table. It's clear to the people who work with me that I'm thinking about our talent most of the time. When we sit down for meetings, I frequently ask managers to review every one of their direct reports with me. I want continual updates. I also insist that as the CEO, I can talk with anyone in the company at any time. Some managers prefer that executives check with them before talking with other people. That's not going to happen here. I want to get to know our employees better and to assess their talent and potential. I also want to know if they have difficulties with a manager. I am evaluating talent all the time. Addition by subtraction. Part of building a great team is learning to recognize when individuals aren't working out and then letting them go. In general, managers are not rigorous enough about this. That's a problem, because often the only way to make room for better players is to get the weaker players to leave the organization. Of course, it's essential for people to feel that the process is fair. But you have to be comfortable having a conversation with a low-performing employee that goes something like this. You rank 10th out of 10 in performance. You're probably great, but this may not be the right job for you. We may not be the right company for you. I know you don't want to be in a situation where people think you're the lowest performer. Sometimes we can find a position in the company that is a better fit. Inevitably, the employee will question the judgment. I'm not really the lowest performer. Then I say, evaluating talent isn't a precise science, but it's very rare that multiple managers think you're 10th out of 10 when you're really number 2. Maybe you're number 9. Maybe. But the real point is that I want you to be successful, and I don't think this is the right situation or career path for you. Sometimes I say the person can stay on for 2 months and look for a job at the same time, as long as he or she maintains a good attitude and continues to contribute. Sometimes the person feels burned or negative and needs to leave right away, with some severance. I hold managers to the same standards when I ask them to build a team. Not long ago, a senior person stepped into a new role. I said to him, 5 months from now, you need to have a great team. Earlier would be better, but 5 months is the goal. To do that, you'll need to spend the next month evaluating the people you have right now. I hope they're good, but if they're not, we'll make changes to replace them. If you need to promote people internally, we'll do that. If you need to go outside, we'll do that. You also need to make sure you retain your best people. I'm going to be really disturbed if I see that people we wanted to keep have started leaving your area. In this case, I saw all the signs I didn't want to see. At 4 months, he hadn't filled a couple of key roles, and a couple of good people had left. We had a conversation. Tell us what we can do to help, I said. If you need us to double your recruiting resources, we'll do that. At 6 months, he still hadn't built a great team, so I said, we're done. After he left, people started to come forward and tell us how demotivating it had been to work for him and that they had come close to leaving as well. There are 2 lessons in that story. 1, don't let a bad situation fester. A poor manager can ruin morale and damage a company's DNA. 2, no matter how well you think you know your organization, if you suspect something's wrong, it's probably worse than you imagine. You can't let those situations continue. They're just too destructive. Don't hire him. I don't think there's a science to recruiting, but I do some things differently. The hiring process typically has 3 elements: the resume, the interview, and the reference check. Most managers overvalue the resume and interview and undervalue the reference check. References matter most. It would be a great experiment to not interview people at all, to hire simply on the basis of the reference check and see what happened. I'm pretty sure that most companies would make better hires if they did that. Resumes are good for establishing basic qualifications for the job, but not for much else. The primary problem with interviews is that it's impossible to avoid being influenced by people who are well-spoken, present well, or are attractive. All sorts of studies show how much appearance drives our perceptions of people. The resume and interview also don't alert you to the biggest potential problems. When someone doesn't succeed in a job, it's generally not for lack of the technical skills. It's because of intangibles that don't come up in an interview. Is he attentive to detail? Does she work well with others? How does he treat his colleagues? References are really the only way to learn these things. The essential traits I look for are success, and passion. The truth is that successful people are rarely let go. They're hired by former bosses in other companies. The presumption is that reference checks aren't worth much because people are scared to say anything negative. That's a valid concern because there have been lawsuits. But the way around it is to dig up people who will speak candidly. Invariably, they're people you know personally or people you can network to find. You can't simply rely on the names a candidate supplies. Admittedly, this is hard if the person is 22 and just out of college, but for someone with 10 or 15 years of experience who has worked at 2 or 3 companies, you must have some mutual acquaintances. Search firms do this by making a lot of calls, and we try to do the same thing. We also look at LinkedIn profiles to find shared contacts. A while back, someone called me for a reference check on a guy named Fred. I didn't know the caller, so I was very guarded. I talked about Fred's strengths and weaknesses, but emphasized that I liked him. The next day, a college friend named Kevin phoned me. He said he was calling on behalf of someone I didn't know, a close friend of his who was thinking of hiring another person who had worked for me. The hiring manager had asked Kevin to get the real story from me. If I didn't know the person making the call, I'd have given a lukewarm response similar to the one on the previous day. But this was a long-time friend asking for my candid opinion. I gave it simply: don't hire him. When you check references, you want to have a conversation as frank as that. It can take real effort to find someone who will be straight with you, but it's worth it. We don't always get this right. For one hire, an outside recruiter that helped with the search had checked some of the references. Ordinarily, we try to do this ourselves. The man didn't work out. It was just a bad fit. After he left, I ran into a couple of people I knew, one who had worked for the guy at another company, and one who'd done business with him as a banker. I hadn't realized that either of them knew him. They told me what they thought of him, which jibed exactly with our negative experience. Sometimes you don't hear an honest assessment until it's too late. Recruiting is so important that we intentionally overinvest in it. We have 10 full-time recruiters on our staff, a lot for a company our size. We also frequently use external search firms, especially for senior positions. Sometimes a company will leave a low-performing person in a job because managers feel there's a shortage of time or energy to recruit his replacement. I don't want to be in that position. As the CEO, I can't be involved in every hire we make. We hired 65 people last June, and interviewing every customer support person would have been a bad use of my time. Even so, I interview many more people than CEOs usually do. I probably interview at least one person every workday. I also make it clear to my senior people that if they're making an important hire, I'm willing to call the person as part of the pitch. People love hearing from the CEO. Steve, I haven't met you yet, but everyone thinks you're amazing. Is there anything I can do to help with your decision? Can I fly out to meet you? They always say no, but the fact that you've offered shows you care. Recruiting is similar to sales, and sometimes the CEO's involvement makes a difference. People talk about certain rules of thumb in talent management. One is that the great people in any company are usually underpaid. That's generally true, and you should skew your compensation system with performance pay to better reward them. Another is that A-level people generally hire other A-level people, but B-level people hire C-level people. I think that's true, too, but for a reason other than the usual one. B players hire C players not because they feel threatened by more talented people, but because most people don't want to work for a mediocre boss. Think about it. Have you ever heard someone say, "I just got offered a job. The person I'll be working for isn't very impressive, but I'm going to take it anyway"? That's not something talented people generally do. Another piece of conventional wisdom is that people leave jobs mainly because they don't like their managers. That's also true. We did exit interviews when people left at DoubleClick, and they were almost always leaving because of a manager. I talk about this with our team at Gilt all the time. If good people are leaving your group, that's your responsibility. I want all our senior people focused on that issue. It's especially important in the internet space, where good people are in high demand and have many choices. I think, too, that the hardest quality to find in a new hire is the ability to bring things to closure. Some people don't realize that analysis is useful only if it results in a decision and implementation. Of all the duties facing a CEO, obsessing over talent provides the biggest return. Making sure that the environment is good, that people are learning, and that they know we're investing in them every day. I'm constantly thinking about that, yet I still don't feel I'm doing enough. If CEOs did absolutely nothing but act as chief talent officers, I believe there's a reasonable chance their companies would perform better. Originally published in January-February 2012, R1201A. Seventh Generation's CEO on Giving Up the CEO Seat by Jeffrey Hollander. Jeffrey Hollander, InspiredProtagonist.com, is a co-founder and the executive chairman of Seventh Generation, a maker of environmentally responsible household and personal care products. The idea. A founder of Seventh Generation describes how he knew it was time to go and how he made that case to his team and his board. It happened 3 years ago, but my memory of the moment I knew I had to step down as CEO is indelible. On the morning after a long business trip to the West Coast, I was returning to the Burlington, Vermont headquarters of the company I had co-founded, Seventh Generation. As I walked through our offices with their view of Lake Champlain and the Adirondacks' distant peaks, I resumed my daily ritual of seeking out associates with whom I didn't regularly connect. By this time, I was struck by a startling realization. People were clicking away at their computers, huddling in conference rooms, or heading out for meetings, and I had no idea what they were working on. The experience unnerved me. As the chief executive, I had long been intimately involved in many of Seventh Generation's inner workings. My team often found my preoccupation with the details both impressive and annoying. I would constantly bird dog efforts to make our diapers absorb just 1 more gram of liquid. I'd focus relentlessly on new styles of perforation for our toilet tissue. I worked with our sales director on setting goals for every item we sold, right down to individual distribution channels and accounts. In meetings, I took meticulous notes on each direct report, listing every commitment and project deadline. But something had changed. Even as I shook off the jet lag, this new, discomforting feeling of detachment persisted. Even worse, it escalated. I found myself baffled by 2 of Seventh Generation's most challenging strategic decisions: whether to sell our household and personal care products at Walmart, and whether to expand the brand outside the United States. For the first time in my career, I was at a loss for answers or ideas. Intellectually, I was in denial, but in my gut, I felt ill-prepared to take Seventh Generation, which in 2007 generated $93 million in annual sales, to its then-stated goal of $250 million. Having steered the company for nearly 2 decades, I knew it was time to find a new CEO. A difficult transition. Any senior leadership transition is fraught with challenges, none more so than when a company founder abdicates the top job. Each morning, as I sat in silence after my hour of pre-dawn exercise, I'd reflect on executives who had bungled their transitions. 2 glaring examples were from high tech. Michael Dell left too early, and Scott McNeely left too late. When Dell handed the reins of his namesake company to a trusted lieutenant, it was the world's largest PC maker. Within 3 years, rivals had clawed away much of Dell's market share, and its founder was compelled to return as CEO. Conversely, McNeely continued as chief of Sun Microsystems despite the company's stunted growth and falling share price. By the time he stepped down, Sun's eventual sale to Oracle was almost inevitable. But then there's Oprah Winfrey, who announced at the peak of her success that she would leave her iconic show in 2011, causing David Carr to write in the New York Times that her gut intuition about knowing when to say no and when it is time to go is worth studying at every business graduate school in the country. The tangible costs of a bungled transition can run to hundreds of millions of dollars worth of squandered market share and submerged sales. But I was more concerned with avoiding damage to seventh generation's intangible assets: our associates' spirit and will, our stakeholders' trust, and our company's mission and reputation. Seventh generation aspires to do more than simply grow market share. Its purpose is to inspire a more conscious and sustainable world by being an authentic force for positive change. Profits are the score, not the game. But to fulfill the company's mission, we had to become bigger and more profitable. We needed a CEO who would use our financial imperatives to fuel our social and environmental imperatives, someone few executive recruiters are equipped to find. Not surprisingly, the more I thought about how best to proceed, the more questions arose. How quickly should I move? How public should I be? How would I get the board's support and associates' buy-in? How would I ensure that seventh generation's fierce commitment to social and environmental sustainability endured? Above all, was I doing the right thing? Every family member and close colleague said no. Seventh generation's directors wondered if they were about to lose the best investment in their portfolios. In 2007 alone, I had helped grow the business by more than 40%. Some staffers thought that no one who replaced me would have the same vision and values. Talented people signed on with seventh generation precisely because it explicitly promised to be a place where they could summon all their individuality and creativity, the very attributes that many companies insist be left at home. Associates worried that a new CEO would fill the place with corporate drones. My wife fretted that I'd end up at home bored and depressed. Nevertheless, we found a way to welcome the biggest change in the company's history. Last June, seventh generation got a new chief, Chuck Maniscalco, who until 2008 had been president and CEO of PepsiCo's nearly $10 billion Quaker, Tropicana, and Gatorade division. I remain at the company as executive chairman. Chuck reports to the board, not to me, and I've been devoting much of my energy to furthering seventh generation's mission, vision, and corporate responsibility strategy. No one can predict the future, but early returns confirm that making the transition was the right thing to do. Transition tenets. It was tough to concede that I was the best person to guide our company through infancy and adolescence, but not into full-fledged adulthood. I overcame lots of obstacles by following several transition principles involving community, transparency, mission, and corporate consciousness, all central to building a purpose-driven organization. As I learned through real-world experience, there are also valuable signposts for finding a new CEO. Look unflinchingly at your own performance. For the better part of the past decade, seventh generation, with help from the author and consultant Carol Sanford, has been trying to develop its corporate consciousness, to make us more sharply aware of how we work and what we want to accomplish. Sure, the phrase exudes a whiff of the mystical, or at least the mysterious, but the idea is inherently tough-minded. Break ingrained habits of thought, kick over stale ideas, and avoid the easy path of simply repeating past successes. In late 2007, when I first seriously considered recruiting a replacement, Seventh Generation was enjoying the best run in its history. In 2008, our sales approached $140 million, an unprecedented.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?